I've been ducking this for a reason. I want to talk about the cost of doing business for a sign and trade, specifically looking at some past examples.
Okay.
So in 2019, the Bucks and the Pacers did Malcolm Brogdon for Indiana's 2020 first and 2 future seconds. Why was it that the Mavs? Why was it that the Pacers had to include a first? Well, because the only thing that the Bucks were receiving was a traded player exception. And traded player exceptions are great, but they also have to yield a player. It's now incumbent on the Bucks to acquire a player with that exception, and they may not even do that. They may not acquire anyone with that exception, which means that they will have effectively lost Brogdon for very little. So the cost of doing business for Indiana was the first round pick because the Bucks said, we're not getting anything by this deal. Also, Malcolm Brogdon's a restricted free agent, so we don't have to play ball with you, Indiana. And Indiana said, yes, you're right. Okay, I think it was even a protected first.
I believe it was a protected first. And that is we can't emphasize that enough. He was a restricted free agent. They had to get Milwaukee to relent.
Yes, that was the cost. Another one, Gordon Hayward and 2 future seconds for a conditional second. That was the Hornets and the Celtics working out the Hayward sign and trade. The Celtics gave up 2 seconds and got a conditional second, which then actually went to the Knicks in the Fournier deal. But that died because it was a heavily protected second, so it didn't really matter. Why did the Hornets get 2 second-round picks and Gordon Hayward? Because the Hornets had cap space. They stretched Nicholas Batum's contract to create the cap space, but they did it anyway. So basically the play was, Boston, if you want to not lose Hayward for absolutely nothing, then you will sign and trade him to us. But as a result, you have to give us 2 second-round picks.
Again, though, not a comparable scenario to what the Knicks are dealing with. The Knicks will not be getting assets to take on Jalen Brunson.
Correct. Next, Kyle Lowry for Goran Dragic and Precious Achiuwa. Goran Dragic was an expiring contract at the time. Precious Achiuwa was used for 2 reasons. Number 1, he was effectively the sweetener, but more importantly, number 2, he was needed to make the math work. So the thing is, if you're Masai, you could have, I think you and Danny talked about this on the last pod, right?
Where he mentioned it, yeah.
Yeah, like Masai overplayed his hand and could have gotten a lot more, but didn't. So the reason Precious Achiuwa was there was, it was partially because he was valued by the Raptors, but more realistically, it was to get the money across. Lowry's 35 and Dragic is on the older side. So, but this still isn't totally a comparable example either.
Nope.
Next, Lonzo Ball for Thomas Satoransky, Garrett Temple, 2024 second, and cash. This isn't perfect, but it's similar. The reason it's not perfect is because, like with Malcolm Brogdon, Lonzo Ball was a restricted free agent. But look at what the value coming back was. It was Satoransky, who really didn't do much for the Pelicans, was eventually dealt to the Spurs and then waived and then signed with the Wizards. Garrett Temple had a good role with the Pelicans for a while, was not good at all. They got a future second and they got cash. Again, you could say what you want about Lonzo Ball. That's not a good return if you're the Pelicans. It just isn't.
That was people did not like that trade because it was made in, the other part of this we should mention, was made in conjunction with New Orleans completing, I think they signed and traded for, or it was a sign and trade Devontae Graham. So like they were getting Graham as well. So it's like they were a little bit more willing to let Lonzo go for not a lot because they were like, hey, we're getting Graham and we want Graham and we like Graham. Well, guess who arguably has the worst contract in the NBA right now?
Well, at least for a cash strap team like the Pelicans, yeah, they need to move him, I would imagine. Yeah,
I mean, I understand there are like bigger contracts that are probably worse, but in terms of like the value, like a player being not worth what his team is paying, it's Devontae Graham. Anyway, Let's get to the last one.
The last one is DeMar DeRozan and a 2020 second for Al-Farouq Aminu, Thaddeus Young, 2025 first and a 2025 second.
This was that 25 first is that's a spicy meatball.
It is, and I'll break down why that was included. Thaddeus Young was expiring salary. He's a good player. At least he was the year before he was traded. So that's where the 2025 second would come into play. The 2025 first comes into play because Al-Farouq Aminu was maybe the worst player on a contract worth more than $7 million.
That's accurate.
How bad was Al-Farouq Aminu? Well, he signed a 3-year, like $29 million deal with Orlando.
I was about to say, God love Orlando for giving him that contract.
Year 1, played 18 games. Year 2, 17 games, then was traded to Chicago where he played 6 games. And then year 3 was traded to San Antonio as part of this deal, didn't play a single game and was waived, which means that he played
$1 million a game, basically, right?
I mean, he played 41 games over a 3-year span and made $29 million.
A little bit less. Good job by you. Good job by his agent, whoever that is.
But so the reason why the Bulls had to include the first was because they had to say to San Antonio, you're going to take on bad money. It's only a year, but it's bad money. And then the Spurs said, like, yeah, we're not doing anything short of that. Let's just quickly review every single trade and look at the team that was sending out the player and what leverage they got back, right? Like on the open market, Malcolm Brogdon's going to get you better than a mid to late first and some seconds. Hayward is going to get you, or at the time was going to get you more than having to give up assets to get rid of him. Kyle Lowry would have been more. We know he would have been more 4 months earlier when he could have been dealt. Lonzo Ball, like he could have been had for what seemed like a hefty price at the time. And DeMar DeRozan, if he were traded and then the Bulls had his bird rights, he would have actually cost more at the time than he did later on, even with Al-Farouq Aminu. So what I'm getting at here is that when a player hits free agency and is acquired via sign and trade, it's not like a standard trade. The leverage shifts to the team that's getting them. It's really just how can we work out the details, which is why if the Knicks give up a first-round pick for Jalen Brunson, they haven't just shot themselves in the foot. They've basically blown off their entire foot, which is why I would be very surprised if that is the cost of doing business. Because if they're sending back someone like Derrick Rose, who is a good player, not of the level of Jalen Brunson, but if the trade is lopsided to begin with, because that's just the nature of the sign and trade, it shouldn't require a first round pick going back if you're also getting something that is of value back for Dallas. And that is the key point. My guess here, and I could be completely wrong, and again, Jalen Brunson may not even leave the Dallas Mavericks, but if this type of thing happens, I don't see the first round pick going back. What I see is a second round pick. It doesn't even have to be the Detroit pick, because again, these are not good second round picks. They're just seconds. It's more like this is the sweetener. It's not a great one. I could see the like the Knicks own second round pick, or like one of the more middling ones with the whole complicated second round pick that I'm not even going to go into detail with.
Oh,
like
yeah, I know
that one. And it could even be, hey, Dallas, you know how we kind of have you locked up because you can't trade really your first round picks? We'll unlock the 2023 pick this year. We'll unprotect it, which means you now have access to trading 2025, 2026, 2027, and so on. Like that's the type of move that I think is much more appropriate than sending out the first. If there was a time for the Mavs to get a first round pick for Jalen Brunson, it was at the deadline.
Yeah.
And that's what all of these trades analyzed yield the same result.
I hope you're right. And you make a great point, and you probably are right. The only thing I will say, I think obviously every situation is unique. The Spurs had no interest in keeping DeMar DeRozan. Now, that's not the be all end all, but I do think it matters. You know, at the same time, it's complicated because like, again, if you're like, we don't see behind the scenes, like how this stuff works. If Jalen Brunson makes his decision, how does it look for the Mavs to play hardball with the Knicks when their player has said, I am leaving. I have decided I do not want to play here anymore. Like at that point, you kind of have to work it out. And I hope you're right. I think you probably are right. I think they could probably get away with it for maybe that Detroit pick, but I don't know. I wonder, who knows maybe the Mavs send a future second or multiple future seconds for the right to get that first back, because I do think that first is very valuable to them, and it is arguably more valuable to them than it is to any other team in the league, which is why, like, if these two teams are doing business anyway, would they not figure out a way to send that pick back to Dallas? Maybe they don't. I don't know. But that's part of my thinking.
So something to add as well is that the Knicks could also send cash, because no matter what, the Mavs are likely to be in the luxury tax. It's just a matter of, are they going to be overwhelmingly in the luxury tax and paying a ridiculous amount of money, or is it going to be less? But another angle, this is kind of like an added wrinkle the Knicks could make. Let's say it doesn't have to be him, but he's the obvious example without getting too confusing. Let's say the Knicks sign and trade Mitchell Robinson. And let's say they created a traded player exception. And let's say it's more than $3 million. Okay. They could find a way to break up the trade that I was talking about into two parts, where they take on someone like Sterling Brown, and then the Mavs save a lot of money. So is it like they take on, like they sign and trade, they stay over the cap, right? They sign and trade Mitchell Robinson. They get a traded player exception. They take on Sterling Brown, and then they send cash for Sterling Brown, or,
sure,
they send the rights to a drafted to a player that's not Rokas Jokubaitis. And then the teams do the deal where it's Derrick Rose going to the Mavs and a third team taking on someone, and the Mavs give up a second round pick, and the Knicks unlock that first round pick so that they have far more flexibility and can build around Luka Doncic. Like, that's the sort of thinking where it can get a little bit more elaborate. I'm not saying it's impossible and that the Mavs don't have leverage and that they won't get a first round pick, period. I'm just saying that if the Knicks do cave and do that, they will have gone off the beaten path than a lot of these teams, and it will have been kind of a weaker moment.
It doesn't seem like a Brock Aller team thing.
It doesn't.
To do. I'll say that.
Yeah. I mean, maybe there's even a way. I mean, this would be very complicated, so I'm a little dubious of it. Maybe there's a way that if you do sign and trade Mitchell Robinson, can you figure out a way to make this into a 4-team deal? They don't happen a lot.
No.
It probably doesn't happen because it's just with base year compensation and two different players, it's a mess. I don't think it happens, but
the other part of it is the timing of it. I mean, we'll see. I expect Brunson to be a night one thing.
Enough time has passed in between the end of the season and now, where I don't think they need a whole lot. They just won't decide it at 6 p.m. on the dot like Lonzo Ball.
No, it might be later in the evening, but I personally will think he will make his decision right away. Mitch, I feel like, because he plays center and because the center position is the one that is perhaps most in flux, as I was talking about with Danny the other day, where you have the Gobert domino and the Ayton domino and like all this other stuff. Mitch is going to be like a day 3, a day 4, a day 5, whatever thing.
Maybe a team that's bowed out of it or knows that they can't get one of those players. Like we talked about Chicago. And what if Chicago
make a
says,
big offer or something?
We can't get Gobert, we can't get Ayton, so let's just strike now.
Let's just jump onto what we can.
And maybe Mitch says, no, I want to wait till those guys end. Or maybe they give him an offer that floors him and they work out a sign and trade and it's fine.
And the other part of it is like, if the principals agree and there's no opportunity cost, there's that word again. If there's no opportunity cost of waiting and seeing how the Mitch thing shakes out to see if it makes sense to include him. Like you see this every free agency where it's like, teams agree to a deal, but they're holding off on it because they want to see. And plus, you can't even actually sign these contracts or complete these trades until after the moratorium is over. So maybe it happens. We'll see.
Yeah. So just to quickly wrap it up, I mean, we talked about Jalen Brunson, the talent. We talked about the impact of the payroll on the Mavs, their luxury tax situation. Talked about the contract, what Brunson could be getting. For me, I think the most I'm comfortable with is that 4 years, $100 million mark, if and only if it's a descending deal of 5%. I'd be much more comfortable, obviously, with 95, with 90, somewhere in that range. I think it is going to be over 85, and I'm fine with that. But my preference, of course, is that it's a descending contract. I still think at the end of the day, yes, it is completely up to Jalen Brunson. But he's looking straight in the face of the idea of if I re-sign here, the odds of me getting traded, they're probably pretty high. If I sign in New York, the odds of me getting traded, they're not zero, but they're lower. And if the time comes, then so be it. We're talking about trade options, what works, what doesn't. Damn you, base your compensation. And then finally, we talked about precedents. I think my final offer, and it's flexible, but basically, yeah, if you can find a way to trade Rose to the Mavs, send out additional salary to a team with cap space, team with a trade player exception, whether it's Burks, whether it's sending a second for Noel, whether it's sending a second for Kemba, whatever it is, that sort of thing. If you can also take on additional salary by doing the Mitch TPE if he's gone, sending cash, unlocking the first round pick, all sorts of minutia that could occur. But finding a way to not trade a first round pick for Jalen Brunson, which history says he shouldn't get as long as the Knicks don't deal an absolute albatross, which it doesn't seem like they would in this situation because of base year compensation. That's the important thing. But again, if they're not going the Ivy route and Brunson wants to be here, I'm totally fine with it. I just prefer it a little bit under $100 million or less descending contracts and not giving up a first. That's my goal.
Do you think Jalen Brunson's a Knick next year?
Honestly, before again, I don't know what he wants, but just looking at the Mavs finances, looking at how he's the only realistic player that can get them closer to where they need to be with Luka Doncic. I think he is. I think he's a Knick. I think that what will happen is that the Mavs will offer him more years and more money, and he'll turn it down. And then they will come out with a report not too long after that Tim McMahon will release, or Mark Stein, one of the guys who's close to Dallas, saying the Mavs offered more money and more years, but Brunson decided to go ahead and leave. That's why they went after Spencer Dinwiddie, because he's insurance. They could start Dinwiddie. They could bring Rose off the bench. They can sell it as we lost Brunson, but we got something out of it. Maybe we unlocked our first round pick. They figure out a way to make other trades down the line. But yeah, I think that the world where Jalen Brunson's a Knick is based on the Mavs finances and how Brunson would be food for fodder for a trade. Like, I think it's likely.
Andrew, think Jalen Brunson's a Knick?
I'm back and forth, and part of it comes from something you guys haven't heard, which is the next part of this cap or no cap, which will air tomorrow. Little behind the scenes, Jeremy and Chris disagree on what to do with Jalen Brunson, and they had it out the Wednesday before what was supposed to be cap or no cap Jalen Brunson.
Wonder why.
So what is now, 2 weeks of quarantine later, you will get to hear them talk it out. You've both said it, obviously, throughout this extensive cap or no cap, but the simple answer is, like, if Jalen Brunson wants to be a Knick, they could be a Knick. If he reads into what Jeremy's talking about with their finances and, like, yes, I could sign for more money, but then I could be playing in Detroit or Sacramento or wherever in a couple of years. Like, I'm not going to be where I want to be, and I trust that my godfather won't trade me if I go to the Knicks. This might be a preview for next week, Jeremy, but the Jaden Ivey of it all, as like their home run swing, is what's giving me hesitation. Because if I'm Jalen Brunson, I know I personally am familiar with the people running the Knicks and would probably take the deal, but the Knicks might have an alternate route and he might not want to be a plan B to whatever the Knicks have planned, when he could just go back to Dallas, and maybe they do want to pair him with Luka and make another run at it. So it's a long-winded way of saying that I think they got a real shot, but there are other factors and other routes that play that I think they may pursue as well.
John, before you respond, can I just jump in with two quick things?
Yeah.
The first is, I do think there is a world where you could have Jaden Ivey and Jalen Brunson on the same team.
John disagreed with me last week when I said that.
I know, but the reason
happens, man.
The question, of course, is, can you have both those players and Emmanuel Quickly? But I think if the second point is, if you're Jalen Brunson, are you starting ahead of Jaden Ivey? Yeah, you are. You're the high paid veteran. You're there. It gives Ivey time. It goes back to the conversation of maybe Ivey doesn't start right away because the fact that, I mean, you would think, hey, he's taking 4th overall, the Knicks signed him and all these things.
Especially if what they're going to have to give up to get up to 4 better be for a starter, right?
Right. But my point is still, you could have him be comfortable, like still getting, it's Tibbs. Are we losing sight of the fact that Tibbs and rookies and all this? And
my understanding is that if Tom Thibodeau's on board with, we're trading for the 4th pick because he's a starter. Because it's Tibbs, he's going to be playing 7 minutes behind Evan Fournier. I'll pass.
But again, I'm not even saying it's behind Evan Fournier. I'm saying it could be starting him off. I'm not saying it's likely. And again, if you go back to the conversation Rick Brunson had with Derek Harper, he said a lot of it depends on, or not Harper, or it was another interview that he had. He said that a lot of it also depends on the Knicks and their drafting situation. So maybe it is that the Knicks say, we'd rather have, if we have a realistic shot at Jaden Ivey, and we'd rather just do that and have him running the point than we do Jalen Brunson, then so be it. But I think that, and it also depends on what the Knicks would trade for Ivey, because, and this is another conversation, but if there's a way where they are hamstringing themselves the following year and they lose their 1st round pick, that maybe they're like, let's win games. Let's have a starter who we know is an NBA talent. Bring him in. Let's make sure our pick, the lowest it is, again, we talked about this was a bad year and they still went 37-45. Yeah. Let's get back to at least above 500. Let's try to make the playoffs. And then we've done what? We've traded for Jaden Ivey for last year's pick, which is 11th, and this year's pick, which is 15th, 16th, if you can get there, something like that. Like, that is how you can have your cake and eat it too, and not be so hamstrung by doing it. And you don't force Ivy in a point where rookies typically don't play winning basketball. It's really hard for them to do it. Even some of the best players in the draft, they like Cade Cunningham, obviously great. Evan Mobley did a great job. Jalen Green didn't have the talent around him either, but like, at a certain point, there's some guys who it's not that they shouldn't start or can't start. It's that they can start, but can they also contribute winning basketball? It's an uphill battle for guys who've never done the NBA grind. And that's why I think that there is a world where you can do that, because the other thing, you can always flip Jaden Ivey down the line for a star that better helps you in other ways. But that's, again, a greater conversation. I do think there's a way that you can have them coexist. I just don't think it's long-term. It doesn't also have to necessarily be long-term for reasons I've stated repeatedly.
I keep going back to the Ivy thing as well. I don't see the deal. I just don't see it.
They'd have to mortgage one of legitimately give up on one of the young kids that.
But even
give up on,
I don't think I don't see them trading RJ. And if they don't trade RJ, like, fine, let's say they're willing to put Quickly on the table and next year's 1st and 11. Is that like how is that getting them to 4? Because if you're Sacramento, I don't know, maybe you do it, but if nobody wants, if Portland doesn't want Randall, Sacramento, if you cannot parlay Randall into a trade up to 4, I just don't see how you get 4. And if you don't get 4 and you're Leon Rose and your backup options are Malcolm Brogdon and D'Angelo Russell, and I'm sure I'm missing some uninspiring name that
Russell Westbrook.
I don't even.
I'm literally just saying a name, guys. Those are a backup option.
Why do you love Russell Westbrook?
Listen, some Knicks fans might say they'd trade anybody on the Knicks for Russell Westbrook.
I'm sure they would.
Despite months ago saying that they wouldn't even go near Russell Westbrook. Shout out Stephen A. Smith.
Why would you bring up his name?
Because
if those are your backup options, man, if you can't get Jalen Brunson and you're Leon Rose, what the fuck are you doing here?
This has been your best point, I think, John. That like the ultimate recruiter. If you can't get Jalen Brunson, then what is this?
Just turn in your resignation. I mean, that may seem a little like, seriously, what are you doing here? Like, if you want him, if you don't think he's a good basketball player, then whatever. We got a different conversation. But like, if you don't get him, and we're sitting here and looking at Malcolm Brogdon or D'Angelo Russell as the next starting point guard next year, like I don't want to hear it. If you can't get Ivy, go get Brunson. I'm gun to my head. Yeah, I think they'll get him.
The only thing with like, why is Leon Rose here if they can't get Brunson? If Jalen Brunson's just very happy with where he is, then why is that an indictment on Leon Rose?
Well, I get it. That's the point. If you're supposed to be able to convince people to leave a happier situation to come to a happier situation, the person you should be able to do is your godson. Like, it would be like if I tried to convince my little brother to come work with us, and he's like, actually, I'm good working at my place of establishment.
So hold on. Let me back Jeremy up on this. If Jalen Brunson is truly happy in Dallas, that's different. But based on everything we've heard, that does not seem to me to be the case, especially with the. It's not even reported with his dad saying that they were offended by how the Mavs operated. So like, that's there. I don't know. Maybe it's all water under the bridge. I don't.
Money
guess.
talks, bullshit walks.
Yes,
and that's, again, if you're talking about how Leon Rose is supposed to be this incredible recruiter, the point of bringing Leon Rose and all his CAA connections in isn't to get Jalen Brunson. It's to get established stars and superstars. And the way you get those players is by getting better as a team. It doesn't have to be finding a star in the draft for big markets reasons, as I've stated. It just has to be get better, plan your future and the cap situation the best way possible. And then you can use that leverage and make yourself be the most attractive team out there with cap space, with the ability to also do another trade on top of that. Down the line, you can do it. It's about patience and it's about building a better product. It doesn't have to be, hey, we got to get Jalen Brunson in the building or else it's a problem. Yes, obviously, if you can't get Jalen Brunson and he signed for something that's less than 4 years, $100 million, then you have to chalk it up to one of two things. Number one, he loves being on the Mavs. Number two, how did you not overpay over that? Like, how did you not pay more for that? Because if that was attainable, why didn't you?
Well, that was what made, we don't have to talk about this, but that was what made the Van Fleet thing a little annoying 2 years ago, is like, he signed for fair market value, right? And obviously he wanted to stay in Toronto, which is fine. That's his right. But he stayed in Toronto for fair market value, which means either the Knicks didn't want to pay him or the Knicks were potentially going to offer to pay him more. And he was like, you know what? Don't bother. Keep your money. But again, that was 2 years ago. So
I don't think he got fair market value just for what it's worth. Like, if you go back to the slide, he made the equivalent of $23.8 million. And his team, he wasn't lured away by another team. The Raptors re-signed him. All these other guys were making the equivalent of like 22, 21, 20, 17. Van Vliet got the most money, and the Raptors were the ones that paid him. I would have been fine with the Knicks getting Van Vliet. But also, we're then talking about Van Vliet getting like $490. And to him, is $5 million worth the happiness he's had in Toronto where he won a title?
Apparently not.
Apparently not.
All right. Well, okay. Andrew?
I think the CAA part of it also, and this, shout out to Chris, this Berman interview, him saying that, like, we knew the connections with Obi, and that's why the Knicks were willing to trade up if they had to. And using his CAA connections, Leon was going to maneuver, like, don't take Obi, guy at team at 4, don't take Obi, team at 5. And he fell to him. And Berman almost hinting that since Jaden Ivey is CAA, that this could also lead to Jaden Ivey dropping, and all of a sudden the Knicks ready to pounce to a later spot. I wonder if that's actually the place where the CAA connections. I'm with you, John. I don't see the deal. There is a longer conversation that started in the beginning here, where Jeremy's big takeaway was that Julius Randle can't be here. The longer conversation is I don't see a team that wants him. Like, talking to Danny about him, talking to Brendan, like the Kings and the Kings and the Blazers, I think, are off the list now. So,
look,
things change constantly.
Things change.
You never know.
Everyone has a plan until they get hit in the mouth.
Right. And the Knicks got hit in the mouth with a 4-year extension for Julius Randle.
That's not my point. And also, no, it is not getting hit in the mouth by the extension, because the whole point of the extension was that they would have the flexibility to trade Julius Randle this offseason without having to worry about where he decides to sign and trade to. That was the whole point.
Mm-hmm.
Getting hit in the mouth is like the Blazers. We want DeAndre Ayton. DeAndre Ayton says, I don't want to go there. Okay. We want Zach LaVine. Zach LaVine says, I don't want to go there. Okay. Well, do we want Jeremy Grant? Pistons want too much for him. Okay, what do we do here? That is it. Julius Randle doesn't have to be the number 1 choice or number 2 choice, hell, even the number 3 choice for teams. But when things start flying off the shelves and you got to cook dinner, you do the best you can.
You hoard goods.
Listen, I'm cool if as a plan E, a team trades with Julius Randle. I don't think it's going to be that easy.
Well, I didn't say it would be easy. It's a plan.
Right. I'm starting to get resigned to the fact Julius Randle's going to be a Knick next year is my point here. Which, listen, I've been very wrong.
And I hope Jeremy
on this pod. What's the capital of Turkey or whatever it's called? I've been very wrong in the past. What draft pick did Ralph Sampson get taken? I'm still at the point where just through the information we've been gathering from the way we've covered this offseason, the Randle trade, I don't see it either. Like the same way I don't also see a trade up to 4 unless it's like RJ plus some one of the other kids.
But it doesn't have to be getting from 11 to 4.
Well, I agree.
Getting from
the Kings are the team that have made it clear that they are looking to trade their pick is my point. Like if it's getting from 11 to 4, I don't see it. If like Ivy's going to fall to 7, or if the Knicks have a trade to get to 8 or 7, then maybe, but I don't
he's
see
not
it
going to fall past 4 or 5.
But my point is, it's easier to jump from 8 to 4 than 11 to 4. So if there's a way to get from 11 to 8, obviously,
which is why we laid out in the first place, like either have to trade something of significant value, get to 4,
right? Which is all of this to say the Jalen Brunson of it all means this is their move. I think it's going to be significantly harder to get to 4, and the Jaden Ivey that we might cover next week is one thing, but like the Jalen Brunson move, it seems like this is what they were brought here to, so they've been set up to do, and like go get it done. If this is within range, and hopefully he hates Texas as much as I do, and he's willing to come home to New York.
We'll find out soon enough.
And if you want the counterpoint of that, tune in for the next part of Cap or No Cap, starring the host of Draft Class, Chris Persianen, against the co-host of Knicks Film School Podcast and the host of Cap Rules Everything Around Me, Cream. Oh, by the way, Chris and I are throwing around a live stream for him too, where he just answers draft questions. Good idea. Called Dream. Draft Rules Everything Around Me.
I like it.
There you go. So more on that later.
Jeremy, you outdid yourself. This was good.
Thank you.
This was very good. Andrew, thank you as always.
Thank you. I actually do have something to plug.
Oh, you do?
Shout out to Rich McLeod, part-time contributor to the Knicks Film School Podcast. He and his Mets newsletter with Michael Barron, formerly of Mets Blog, but they now have a newsletter called Just Mets. They have partnered up with Playback to do some Mets watch parties over the rest of the summer. And they will be joined by yours truly on said watch parties. So I've collaborated with them. Our first Playback watch party of a Mets game is this Wednesday. Oh boy, am I wondering, like the beauty of the basketball ones, I know when the clock's going to run out. I have no idea when this baseball game's going to end, but we're working on some things to make it entertaining for however many hours this baseball game goes.
And how do folks get access to that?
So check out at just _ Mets on Twitter. You can subscribe to their newsletter. It's their pinned tweet. And then it's a free link. It's not like a Patreon perk. It's just anybody that has access to the link can join us. We'll tweet it out on Wednesday. So yeah, you can join me and Rich and Michael for a Mets game on Wednesday.
I'm going to follow them right now.
Playing the Milwaukee Brewers. There you go.
The Brewers.
Yes.
They won yet?
Yes, they won today. You know who has not lost in like a month, Jeremy?
Seemingly the New York Yankees.
Well, them too, but the Atlanta Braves literally have won 11 games in a row.
I know.
The Mets, like, they're up 3-1 in the 7th inning against the Angels right now. God knows if this comes back to bite me and they blew the game after this gets released. But like they are going to end up with a 5-5 or 4-6 road trip when they're like decimated by injuries. And regardless of what happens in this game, they will end tonight with the best record in the National League. And the panic that has set in this fan base, because the Braves, we do not have proof they will ever lose a game again. You know, I'm already kind of over the Rangers because they were never supposed to beat the Lightning to begin with. Shout out for Jeremy for predicting the Lightning to win. But I'm also ready to go enjoy the summer of the Mets competing. And now the Braves are seemingly back in championship form, which is not great, Pub.
Oh, there's always the dark side.
John, the Yankees don't lose.
I've heard.
They're not against the Chicago Cubs. They don't.
No. They don't lose. They're on pace for 120 wins. That is a real thing.
I know Aaron Judge is on pace for like 66 home runs.
And Joey Gallo.
Yes. That like in a lineup that, as Jeremy mentioned, has like automatic outs in it. And yet they're still like their pitching is great. They have the MVP of the league on pace for 60 something home runs. Yeah. Yankees are really good. You should get into baseball this summer, John. That's it.
I'm good. Thank you. I appreciate that. Everybody, Jeremy, awesome again. Andrew, awesome by you as always. And everybody out there, awesome job by you listening to another episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. Tune in later this week for Chris and Jeremy for cream in pod form. That sounded odd. And other wonderful content from your friends at Knicks Film School. We will talk to you later. Peace out.